The tribunal chamber was oppressively silent, the air thick with unspoken judgment. Asher Thorne stood motionless, his posture impeccable despite the gravity of the situation. On the elevated dais, President Julian Vance watched him, his face a mask of cold authority. Julian's voice, when it came, was clipped and devoid of warmth, each word landing like a hammer blow. He declared that his chief strategist and mentor, Asher Thorne, was found guilty of leaking classified intelligence, of engaging in bribery and corruption, and of a flagrant disregard for federal law. Julian then posed the question, his voice dropping to a near whisper that carried to every corner of the room, of whether Asher admitted to the charges. Asher didn't lift his gaze from the polished marble floor. He murmured his confession, a quiet acknowledgement of guilt. It was a trap Julian himself had meticulously designed, a snare he had personally led Asher into. How could he not confess? The assembly of cabinet members and senators held their collective breath. Through his lowered lashes, Asher saw the glint of Julian's expensive Italian shoes as the young president descended from the dais and approached him. Julian's voice was like ice against his ear as he decreed the sentence. He announced the immediate seizure of all Thorne family assets, the permanent exile of Asher to a remote monitoring station in northern Maine, and the lifetime blacklisting of Leo Sterling from any form of public service. Slowly, Asher raised his head, his eyes meeting Julian's. The president, dressed in a bespoke navy suit, exuded a chillingly powerful aura. He looked nothing like the 9-year-old boy who had first come to Washington, the boy who had clung to Asher's coat during his first press conference, his voice trembling as he called him his teacher. A faint, sad smile touched Asher's lips. He remarked softly that Julian had certainly grown up. A muscle in Julian's jaw twitched violently. He seemed to fight back a retort, his lips thinning into a white line. Asher looked away, his voice ringing out with formal clarity, stating that he accepted the sentence. From the back of the chamber, Leo's anguished cry tore through the silence. He shoved his way through the crowd, pushing past security agents who tried to block his path. He stumbled to Asher's side and dropped to his knees, grabbing Julian's arm. He pleaded with his cousin, reminding him that the winters in Maine were brutal and that Asher's delicate health couldn't possibly withstand such a climate. He insisted his teacher would die there. Julian stared down at him, his expression one of utter disdain. He signaled his security detail, and the cool metal of a sidearm was pressed against Leo's temple. Julian informed his cousin, his voice dangerously low, that he was overstepping. The president's decisions were not open for debate. Senator Sterling, Leo's father, fell to his knees, his face pale with terror. He begged the president to forgive his son's insolence. Asher gently disentangled Leo's hands from his arm, patting his shoulder in a calming gesture. Leo was shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming down his face. He had always been an emotional boy. Asher remembered a time when a young Leo, after being reprimanded for a poor essay, had tearfully declared that one day he would become a great statesman just like Asher, so he could mentor Asher's own children. A future that now seemed impossible. Leo was barred from his career, and Asher would never have a family. Asher told Leo that he was sorry for dragging him into this. Leo shook his head, his voice choked with sobs. He argued that Asher was innocent, that Julian of all people should know that. He began to shout that the incriminating files were planted, a clear setup by their rivals. Asher cut him off with a sharp command to be silent. He looked up at Julian, whose knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the dais. A storm of emotions churned in the young president's eyes. Unflinching, Asher met his gaze, then bowed his head once more, formally accepting his fate. He had no living parents, no wife or children. When federal agents raided his Georgetown home, the only things of value they found were the books and paintings Julian had given him over the years. Julian had always understood his tastes perfectly. Asher had believed it was a sign of respect, of love. Only now did he understand it was a sign of a deep, suffocating resentment. On the day of his departure, Leo came to the private airfield to see him off. With him was Marcus Shaw, a fellow cabinet member and Asher's oldest friend. Years ago, Asher, Marcus, and the late President Vance had been inseparable, three ambitious young men ready to take on the world. Politics had a way of eroding such simple bonds. Marcus looked at him, his expression pained. He could only manage a hoarse whisper, telling Asher to take care of himself. Asher offered a small, reassuring smile. Leo clutched his sleeve, refusing to let go, his eyes welling up with fresh tears. Asher gently tapped the space between his brows, telling him not to cry. Leo wiped his eyes fiercely and made a solemn promise that he would come to Maine and bring him back. Asher agreed, knowing it was a promise that couldn't be kept. He pried Leo's fingers from his coat and turned to the federal marshals waiting for him, telling them he was ready. The journey north was long. That night, as their convoy stopped at a desolate rest area, Asher was drinking from a bottle of water when a black SUV screeched to a halt beside them. Men in tactical gear swarmed out, moving with practiced efficiency. Asher sidestepped the first man who lunged for him, the water bottle falling and spilling across the grimy asphalt. He had made many enemies during his time in Washington. An assassination attempt now that he was disgraced was not entirely unexpected. But as he dodged another attacker, he caught a glimpse of the insignia on their uniforms. They were Secret Service. Julian's personal detail. A cold dread settled in his stomach. The president wanted him dead after all. He froze for a fatal second, and a cloth was pressed over his face. The world dissolved into blackness. When he awoke, the scent of lemon oil and old books was strangely familiar. He blinked, the room coming into focus. He was in the presidential suite of the Citadel, Julian's private residence. A wave of confusion washed over him. He tried to lift his hand and was stopped by a soft clinking sound. A slender, gold-plated cuff was locked around his wrist, tethering him to the heavy mahogany bed frame. The suite was empty of staff, but behind a large decorative screen, a silhouette was hunched over a desk, writing. The pounding in his head was severe. He called out, his voice raspy, trying to get the president's attention. The figure rose and walked around the screen. It was Julian. He had clearly just showered. His dark hair was damp and unruly, and he wore only a simple white silk robe that made his skin look impossibly pale. Asher raised his shackled hand, the cuff striking the bedpost with a sharp ring. He asked Julian, his voice a low, steady monotone, if this was his idea of punishment. He questioned whether Julian's hatred for him ran so deep that he needed to degrade him in this way. Julian didn't answer. He knelt by the bed, his eyes tracing every line of Asher's face. After a long moment, he took Asher's cuffed hand and pressed it to his lips. He murmured that his teacher was finally awake. A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across his face as he added that now, Asher belonged only to him. A jolt of alarm shot through Asher. He yanked his hand back, his voice sharp with command, demanding to know what Julian was doing. Julian tilted his head, an expression of pure innocence on his beautiful face. He replied that he hadn't done anything at all. Yet, Asher took a deep breath, trying to quell the rising panic. Julian had never looked at him like this before. As a child, his eyes had been full of admiration and dependence. As he grew, a certain wariness had crept in, a hint of fear. At the tribunal, his gaze had been filled with a murderous rage. But this was the look of a predator closing in on its prey. It was hungry, obsessive, a possessive gleam that spoke of something far more twisted than political revenge. A chill snaked up his spine. Couldn't be. He had raised the boy since he was 9. He was Julian's mentor, his guardian, a surrogate father. The very idea that Julian might harbor such feelings was a monstrous perversion of their history. As he reeled from the thought, Julian's cool hand suddenly clamped around his ankle. Asher flinched from the touch. With a sharp tug, Julian pulled him down the bed, and Asher tumbled into his arms. The position was intimate, suffocating. Julian's hold was like steel, rendering him immobile. Rage, pure and hot, unlike any he had ever felt, coursed through him. His body trembled, and when he spoke, his voice shook with fury. He accused Julian of being insane, reminding him fiercely that he was his teacher. A low, husky laugh rumbled in Julian's chest. He reached up, his thumb stroking Asher's lower lip with a heavy, deliberate pressure. He agreed, his voice thick with a strange, dark emotion. Then he leaned in and kissed him. The taste of blood filled Asher's mouth as he bit down, struggling against the assault. His hair came undone, spilling across the pillows. With a final surge of desperation, he kicked out, striking Julian hard in the ribs. Julian grunted in pain and released him. Asher scrambled back, glaring at him, his chest heaving. He berated Julian for his shamelessness, for his scandalous behavior. He demanded to know what had become of the principles, the decency he had taught him. He told Julian that if he truly hated him, he should have let the exile stand, or simply had him executed. To subject him to this humiliation was unforgivable. He finished his tirade, shaking, and fumbled for the ribbon to tie back his hair. Julian watched him, unconcerned, wiping a smear of blood from his own lip without so much as a wince. He offered a sly, mocking smile, suggesting a different interpretation of their relationship. He told Asher that he had never hated him. He simply wanted him. He confessed to a maddening jealousy, seeing Asher smile at Leo, at Marcus, at anyone but him. He asked, plaintively, why Asher couldn't save his smiles, his favor, for him alone, reminding him of how he used to be the center of Asher's world. Asher ordered him to stop. He reminded Julian of his position as president, asking if he had any concept of the dignity of his office. He accused him of abandoning all morality. Julian's expression hardened. He asked if being president meant being like his father, a man of grand strategies and little heart. He wondered aloud if Asher thought him unworthy of the office because he lacked his father's political genius. Then his voice dropped, turning venomous, as he suggested that perhaps Asher's own feelings for his father were not so different from the feelings Julian now held for him. The blood in Asher's veins turned to ice. With a trembling hand, he struck Julian across the face, the sound cracking in the silent room. He hissed at him to get out. Julian's head snapped to the side. A faint red mark bloomed on his cheek, and his eyes glistened with something that looked like hurt. For a moment, Asher almost felt a pang of regret. Then Julian lunged, burying his face in the crook of Asher's neck and biting down hard. The pain was sharp enough to bring tears to Asher's eyes. Julian pulled back, a vicious smile playing on his lips. He said it no longer mattered. With Asher now a prisoner in the citadel, everyone would assume he had perished on his way to exile. He declared triumphantly that Asher was his, and his alone. Asher couldn't push him away. He turned his head, squeezed his eyes shut, and repeated that Julian was mad. Julian stood up, looking down at him from his full height. He agreed. He had been mad for a long time, ever since the moment he realized he was in love with him. Asher said nothing more. The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of the heavy door being locked from the outside. He opened his eyes. He was alone. The lingering throb on his lips was proof that the nightmare had been real. Utterly, horrifyingly real. Overwhelmed by exhaustion and confusion, he surrendered to sleep. His dreams were a chaotic montage of the past. He saw himself as a young man, rescued from a miserable life by the future president, then a charismatic senator who saw his potential. He was brought to Washington given a purpose. At 25, he was a rising star in the party. At 30, when Vance won the presidency, he named Asher his closest advisor. President Vance was a brilliant leader but a distant father. On the day Julian was born, the First Lady died in childbirth, and Vance could never bring himself to look at his son again. So Asher, along with Leo's family, had raised the boy. The First Lady's death had broken something in the president. He grew withdrawn, his health failing, and when Julian was just 9, he died. Vance had only one son. On his deathbed, he had summoned Asher. The political landscape was treacherous. The First Lady's family, led by the powerful General Croft, was circling, waiting to use the young heir as a puppet. The dying president had gripped Asher's hand, his voice weak, and begged him to protect Julian. He had given Asher a shocking directive. If Julian proved unfit to rule, Asher himself was to take power. Those were his last words. The announcement of the president's death had echoed through the citadel. Young Julian, stunned and terrified, had tugged on Asher's sleeve and whispered his name. Asher had wiped his own tears away, taken the boy's hand, and promised him he would not be afraid, that he would always be there. At the inauguration, before the entire political establishment, the child had faltered. A rival senator, sensing weakness, had stood to declare the young heir unfit. In that moment, seeing the panic in Julian's eyes, Asher had moved. He didn't draw a sword. He stepped to the podium and, with cold, surgical precision, unleashed a torrent of flawlessly documented accusations that utterly destroyed the man's career and reputation. The political assassination was swift and total. Bloodlessly, Asher had turned his gaze on General Croft, his voice calm but lethal, and made it clear that he was the protector of the new president, and any challenge to the boy's authority would be met with absolute ruin. Then, he had turned and bowed low to the new president, pledging his allegiance. Marcus Shaw had followed, then Senator Sterling. After a long, tense moment, General Croft had knelt, and the entire assembly followed suit. A moment later, Julian's small, trembling voice had spoken his first words as president. Asher awoke to bright morning light. Julian was asleep in a chair by his bed, still in the suit he had worn the day before. He must have come straight from the Oval Office. As Asher stirred, Julian's eyes fluttered open. A gentle smile touched his lips. He asked if Asher was hungry. He gestured to a bowl of rich beef stew on the nightstand, explaining that he had the kitchen make it, knowing Asher was always cold. He lifted a spoonful to Asher's lips. Asher turned his head away, his voice flat as he told Julian to let him go. Julian's smile didn't falter, but his eyes grew hard. He reached out and stroked Asher's cheek. He replied, his words heavy and final, that Asher should never again think of leaving his side. He was a prisoner. Julian spent his days in the suite with him, working on state documents at the large desk. At night, he would sleep, fully clothed, on the other side of the vast bed. Sometimes, when a political problem stumped him, he would ask for Asher's advice, just like old times. The only difference was the gold cuff that never left Asher's wrist. No amount of pleading, reasoning, or threats would persuade Julian to remove it. One morning, an aide announced that Leo Sterling was demanding to see the president. Julian, without looking up from his papers, coldly refused the request. A moment of silence, then Leo's voice, amplified by rage, could be heard from the hallway. He was shouting, accusing Julian of being a coward, of feeling guilty for what he'd done to their teacher. Julian's face became a mask of ice, a murderous intent flickering in his eyes. He stood, ready to go out and silence him. Asher hesitated, then reached out and caught the hem of his jacket. Julian looked down at him. Asher avoided his gaze and spoke slowly, reminding him that Leo was family, that his actions were born of a fierce, naive loyalty. He pointed out that Julian had already destroyed his future and pleaded with him not to harm him further. Julian stared at him for a long, unreadable moment before a humorless smile twisted his lips. He assured Asher that he wouldn't harm Leo, his tone dripping with sarcasm as he described their bond as being like brothers. Then his voice turned sinister, and he added that if Leo were to find out Asher was here, he could no longer guarantee his safety. Asher fell silent. He knew it was a threat. Julian had Leo brought into the adjoining study. It was a calculated cruelty, placing them so close, separated only by a door left slightly ajar. Asher could hear every word. Leo's voice was thick with emotion, accusing Julian of orchestrating Asher's disappearance. He said that Asher never made it to Maine, that he had vanished without a trace. He demanded to know if this was the outcome Julian had wanted all along. Julian's reply was a short, contemptuous laugh. He stated that if Asher was dead, it was no great loss. He was a criminal, after all, and deserved no better. Leo's voice rose to a roar. He shouted that the charges were fabricated, that the evidence against him and Asher was planted by Croft's faction. He asked Julian how he could possibly believe that Asher, the man who had protected him his whole life, would ever betray him. After a beat of silence, the sound of a heavy object being thrown against a wall echoed through the room. Julian's voice was frigid as he asked Leo what right he had to challenge him. He called Leo a disgrace, a political failure who had no standing to question the president. Leo, enraged, must have lunged at him. There was a dull thud, and Julian sneered that Asher had always favored Leo. Yet now he was nothing. A nobody. He told Leo that if it weren't for his father's title, he would be denied access to the Citadel entirely. Asher closed his eyes, a sharp pain lancing through his chest. He remembered finding the two boys once when they had snuck out of the Citadel and gotten lost. They were sitting on a curb, holding hands and crying. He had carried Julian on his back and held Leo's hand, walking them home. That night, Julian had whispered in his ear that he loved his teacher and he loved Leo, and he wished the three of them could be together forever. A tear slid from beneath his eyelid. How had forever come to this? Leo left without another word. The boy who had cried so easily was gone, replaced by a man whose back was ramrod straight even in defeat. Shortly after, an aide announced another visitor, Marcus Shaw. Julian let out a dry, mirthless laugh, remarking on how busy his day had become. As Marcus entered the study, his footsteps paused. His gaze flickered towards the connecting door, and for a split second, Asher was certain Marcus knew he was there. Then his eyes moved on, and he greeted the president with perfect formality. They discussed policy matters, their conversation professional and distant. As he was about to leave, Marcus paused and asked the president if he was familiar with a particular historical quote about tyranny and the price of freedom. Julian, smiling thinly, asked him to elaborate. Marcus recited the line, his meaning perfectly clear. Before he could finish, Julian cut him off, his smile turning sharp. He asked what would happen if he chose to ignore such historical s. Marcus met his gaze for a long moment, then lowered his head and took his leave. After he had gone, Julian came to Asher's side. He took his hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. He asked Asher if he understood the meaning behind Marcus's quote. Asher sighed, not bothering to pull his hand away. He finished the quote for him, its message one of letting go of something that cannot be held by force. He told Julian that this charade had gone on long enough. Julian's grip tightened. He pressed a soft kiss to Asher's knuckles and murmured that even if Asher had no love for him, he would never let him go. Months bled into a year. Julian told him that Leo had joined a special forces unit deployed overseas, seeking to build a new life for himself. Marcus, meanwhile, had become a master of political maneuvering, seemingly aligning himself with General Croft's faction. Asher found himself sleeping more and more, the will to fight draining out of him. He was beginning to accept his new reality. Julian was attentive to his needs. Knowing Asher was always cold, he kept the suite perpetually warm. On sunny days, he would unlock the cuff and, holding his hand tightly, lead him out to a secluded private garden. He would talk, confessing things Asher had never known. He explained that his alliance with Croft had been a desperate gambit, born from the fear that he was losing Asher's respect and loyalty. He envied Leo's easygoing nature, his family's love, and the affection Asher had always shown him. He felt he had nothing but the hollow title of president. He admitted he had worked tirelessly to be a leader worthy of Asher's guidance, but felt Asher only grew more distant. He'd come to believe that only by seizing absolute control could he ensure Asher would never leave him. Julian looked at him, his eyelashes trembling. Asher felt a flicker of something. Pity, perhaps. He wanted to say something, but his throat was dry. He raised a hand, and as if he were a child again, Julian leaned down, pressing his head into Asher's palm with a soft murmur. Asher looked away, finally finding his voice. He explained that it was never about Julian's performance as president. After Vance's death, he had dedicated his life to protecting Julian and securing his legacy. He had forsaken any chance of a personal life, a family of his own. His only goal was to see Julian firmly in power, safe from men like Croft. Even when Julian had turned on him, he hadn't felt betrayed, only a sense of completion. His little president had learned to be ruthless. He had just never imagined the boy's motivations were so terribly personal. He finally admitted that he was sorry. Julian simply squeezed his hand and draped a cashmere blanket over his shoulders. He said that as long as Asher stayed with him now, that was all that mattered. Asher had almost resigned himself to this life when Vivian Croft found him. Julian was in a morning briefing when she burst into the suite, a retinue of staff trailing behind her. The First Lady's voice was shrill as she declared her intention to find the tramp who had been keeping her husband from her bed. Her tirade stopped abruptly when she saw him. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed as they fell upon the gold cuff on his wrist. Before Asher could speak, Julian stormed into the room. He shoved Vivian aside, his voice a low snarl as he demanded to know who gave her permission to be there. Vivian, catching her balance, pointed a trembling finger at Asher, her face a mask of betrayal. Julian informed her coldly that he had always been honest about his affections lying elsewhere, and that their political marriage was all she would ever get from him. Vivian stared from Asher to Julian, then back again. Composing herself with a terrifying stillness, she gave a curt nod and, with a final, venomous look at Asher, excused herself. After she left, Julian rushed to his side, asking if he was all right. Asher, shaken, could only express his concern that now that Vivian knew, the scandal of him imprisoning his mentor would destroy Julian's presidency. He begged Julian once more to let him go. A strange, twisted smile appeared on Julian's face. He refused, stating that he would bear any disgrace to keep Asher by his side. Asher expected Vivian to expose them immediately. Instead, there was silence. Days later, news came from overseas. Leo Sterling, recently promoted for his valor, had been killed in action when his helicopter was shot down over a hostile border. When Julian told him, Asher was reading. A wave of nausea and grief washed over him, and he coughed, a spray of blood dotting the pages of the book. Julian rushed to help him, but Asher threw his hand off. He stared into Julian's eyes and asked him again. Julian looked away, confirming softly that Leo was gone. Body not recovered. Asher closed his eyes, swaying on his feet. When he opened them, he slapped Julian across the face with all his strength. He asked if this was the outcome he had wanted. Julian remained silent. Asher threw the heavy book at him, his voice cracking as he ordered him to get out. This time, Julian left. Asher collapsed, covering his face with his hands as sobs racked his body. The grief brought on a serious illness. He drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by nightmares. In his fevered state, he felt Julian holding his hand, heard him begging him not to leave, pressing something small and folded into his palm. Shortly after Asher began to recover, Julian suddenly collapsed. The Citadel's doctors were baffled. The president was in a coma from which he might never wake. The very next day, Vivian Croft announced she was pregnant with the president's heir. Simultaneously, news outlets broke a story that shook the nation to its core. The disgraced strategist Asher Thorne had secretly been held as the president's captive lover for over a year. It was a coup. Before he could process it, Vivian had him thrown into a secure holding cell beneath the citadel. He was not there long before Marcus Shaw appeared. He looked exhausted, his face pale against his dark suit. He asked Asher to come with him, offering to help him disappear. He reminded Asher of his old dream of a quiet life, a bookshop in the country, and offered to share that life with him. Asher looked at him steadily and shook his head. He asked Marcus if he had known all along that he was in the citadel. Marcus gave a sad smile, admitting that he recognized the unique scent of sandalwood Asher always wore the moment he entered the study that day. He confessed that he had been trying to find a way to free him ever since, and that leaking the story to the press had been his idea. He claimed Leo's death was Croft's doing, not Julian's, and that now was their only chance to escape before the country descended into chaos. Asher cut him off. He asked if Croft's coup and Leo's death weren't also part of his plan. Marcus's face contorted. He admitted to helping engineer the coup, but swore he had no part in Leo's death. His only goal, he cried, was to free Asher. Ignoring his outburst, Asher asked if Julian was still alive, and if Croft's forces had secured the citadel. Defeated, Marcus admitted the president was still unresponsive, and the coup was in its final stage. Asher commanded Marcus to release him. He reminded him of the promise they both made to the late President Vance, to protect the Republic. Marcus opened the cell. Asher took the pistol Marcus offered him and walked out into the chaos. As he left, Marcus's voice, broken, followed him. He confessed that this was all a test set by Julian. Julian had bet that if offered a choice, Asher would choose freedom with Marcus. If he had, Julian would have let them go. But even now, Julian still came first. The citadel was swarming with Croft's private mercenaries. In the command center, Vivian stood holding the nuclear football, the ultimate symbol of executive power. General Croft, in full military dress, stood beside her, announcing that with the president incapacitated, he was assuming emergency control of the government in the name of the unborn heir. Asher raised his pistol and fired. The bullet whizzed past Croft's ear and shattered a monitor behind him. Asher's voice was like steel as he asked who gave a traitor the right to govern. Croft spun around, his face contorted with rage when he saw Asher. He ordered his men to seize him. Just as they advanced, a panicked voice over the intercom announced that the president was awake. Croft, realizing he was out of time, snarled at his men to kill them all. A calm voice from the doorway asked if that included him. Julian stood there, pale but steady on his feet, a faint, mocking smile on his lips. Before Croft could react, the main doors were blown open, and a team of loyalist special forces stormed the room. At their lead, dressed in combat gear, was Leo Sterling. Leo raised his rifle and fired a single, perfect shot. General Croft collapsed, a bullet hole neatly centered in his forehead. Leo's voice rang out, declaring the traitor neutralized. Vivian screamed and dropped the football, which rolled across the floor. She scrambled to her father's body, weeping hysterically. Julian coldly ordered her to be taken away, adding that the child she carried was to be dealt with as well. The coup was over. Leo retrieved the football and, ignoring Julian completely, walked over and pressed it into Asher's hands. He told him the choice was now his. Asher looked from Leo's hardened face to Julian, who stood watching him from across the room. He saw Marcus in the shadows, his expression unreadable. He remembered the note Julian had pressed into his hand during his fever. Leo is alive. Trust me. He finally understood the breathtaking scope of Julian's plan. He had allowed Croft to believe he was winning, faking his own poisoning, using Asher as bait to draw out all his enemies at once. And it had worked. All his rivals were gone. His power was absolute. Asher walked to Julian and placed the football back in his hands. He told him that his job was finally done, and he would not be staying. Julian grabbed his wrist, his eyes wide and pleading, red-rimmed with unshed tears. For once, the president was speechless. Asher gently removed his hand, turned, and walked away through the carnage, never looking back. In his 6th year of running a small bookstore in a quiet Vermont town, the news broke that the president, a wildly popular and successful leader who had unified the nation, had died unexpectedly. The man browsing the history section next to Asher sighed, remarking what a shame it was, dying so young with no heir. Asher's hand faltered, and a book slipped from his grasp. A familiar voice, laced with amusement, warned the man to be careful with his treasonous talk. Asher turned. A man in a well-tailored coat was walking towards him. He bent down, picked up the book, and handed it to Asher. His eyes were warm, and a slow smile spread across his face. He said it had been a long time. "My name is Annie. My dad, Asher, is the best person in the whole world. He found me when I was just a little girl on the streets, and he gave me a home and a name. He's the smartest and kindest man I know. I love him more than anything, and I know he loves me too. At least I was sure of it until the strange man showed up. He tried to come into our house, but Dad blocked the door and got really angry. He yelled a lot of things I didn't understand, words like abdication and irresponsible and what about the country, Julian? Dad got so worked up he started coughing, and I ran over to tug on his shirt and tell the strange man to go away. The man just stood there, and his voice was very gentle when he said that Leo and Marcus could handle things now. That just made Dad angrier, and he slammed the door. That night, it started to rain hard. Dad couldn't sleep. I saw him get up and pace around, and then he went and opened the front door. The strange man was still there, completely soaked, looking like a sad puppy. Dad sighed and got a towel to dry his hair. The man looked over Dad's shoulder and saw me peeking from my room, and he gave me a little wink. I knew right then he was here to steal my dad. The next day, I marched right up to him and told him Dad was mine and he couldn't have him. The man just laughed, his eyes crinkling up. He knelt down and pulled a brightly wrapped piece of candy out of his pocket, something I'd never seen before. He told me a little secretively that my dad loved him most of all. Then he said if I called him Dad too, he'd make sure I had candy like this every single day. I turned my nose up at him. But a little while later, I went back and tugged on his sleeve. I whispered that I would do it, but he couldn't tell my dad. He smiled and nodded. I took a deep breath and quietly said the word. "Dad?" "Yes, my dear daughter," he boomed, his voice ridiculously loud. He looked over at my actual dad, who was sorting books by the window, and grinned like a fool. "Asher, did you hear that? Annie wants me to be her dad too. When are we getting married?" "Julian," my dad shouted, glaring at both of us. I ran. But the strange man didn't. He just walked over to my dad and leaned his head on his shoulder, like a big dog. "Asher," he whispered, so quietly I could barely hear. "Please don't make me leave again.